Welcome to Historically Speaking. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and our topic is Enduring Artists of the Gilded Age, something I think that is appropriate for us in the bleakness of midwinter. So defining my terms a little bit, Gilded Age. Gilded Age comes from a novel that Mark Twain wrote in 1873, in which he made the analogy that although the United States had a great deal of material prosperity after the Civil War, that it was like gilding, it covered up base metal underneath. So the Gilded Age is something that was a bit of a veneer. And of the artists that we are going to be looking at today, 6 of my favorite culled from many years of teaching American studies, these are artists that today are the subjects of exhibitions. And each of the 6 artists that I am going to travel through with you have all been featured in museums. And some of them are really household names. However, a century ago, or more, when these artists were living, they might not have achieved the same degree of success and indeed notoriety that some of them have today. So let us begin with our first featured artist, who is going to be James McNeill Whistler. Whistler was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. His father was in the diplomatic corps, and even though he was born in Massachusetts, he lived virtually none of his life in Massachusetts. His father was a minister at St. Petersburg in the 1850s, and he thought it would be good for his son to go to West Point. Well, that did not work out. And I think when you look at the photographic image of Whistler, he looks very much like the Bohemian artist. And in one of his self-portraits that you can see painted in an impressionistic style, it's very reminiscent of a pose that Rembrandt did in his many self-portraits. Whistler began painting in the late 1850s, early 1860s, and one of his early works was a portrait of his mistress. Her name was Nan Heffernan. And Whistler called this Symphony in White. So many of his compositions had either musical titles or they were called arrangements by color. And this, it caused a great deal of scandal because white on white, standing on a bare rug, and people were a little bit upset, especially with Victorian propriety, that his mistress would have been wearing virginal white. Following in themes of Whistler and his colors, this is an image of Battersea Bridge in London, and this is at twilight, very impressionistic, and Whistler called this Nocturne in blue and gold. Nocturne in black and gold was one of the most controversial paintings of its time. And the English critic Ruskin said in a newspaper review that Whistler was flinging a pot of paint in the public's face. Whistler sued in court, instigating a libel suit that dragged on for years. It bankrupted him, and in the end, he was found to have been libeled, but the court only gave him a farthing. So this is a very interesting painting to know the history behind it and that it caused a lawsuit. Now, what makes Whistler a household word is this painting. Its original name is Arrangement in Gray and Black, and it's the portrait of the artist's mother. We know this by its popular name, Whistler's Mother. And this is an unlikely depiction of American motherhood because her pose is unusual. So Anna McNeill Whistler, Whistler's widowed mother with whom he lived, was very disapproving of his rather flamboyant lifestyle. And if you notice here, we have unusual angles, we have a print on the wall, very much in the compositional arrangement of Japanese art. So the more you study this painting, there is an unease with which his mother is kind of looking out, probably contemplating her son's wild, profligate lifestyle with the way that she is posed, looking quite demure. This was the first American painting to hang in the Louvre in Paris in the 19th century. But what catapulted it to fame is that in 1934, the painting went on tour to the United States. And in this newspaper image, we can see FDR's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, having her picture taken with the painting, and she became kind of the image of American motherhood. And at the same time that the painting went on tour in the United States, there was a stamp issued to commemorate all mothers. There are some wonderful parodies of this painting that are a little bit beyond the purview of what we're going to be doing today. And you can see that this particular pose that Whistler used to paint others, he did the great English critic Thomas Carlyle in a similar arrangement like we have seen for Whistler's mother. Winslow Homer, Boston-born, a bachelor, lifelong bachelor, strongly committed to being an abolitionist. He would start his career as an illustrator for Harper's Weekly magazine during the Civil War. He was very camera shy and over the course of his life was very reclusive. This is a very symbolic painting that he did at the conclusion of the Civil War called Veteran in a New Field. So here we have a man who was a veteran of the Civil War, returning home. And at the forefront of the picture, we see fallen sheaves of wheat. And this has long been a symbol of his fallen comrades. So we have the challenge that lies before him of returning to his agrarian life. And I think it's just as the soldier is facing an uncertain future, will he be able to work in the same way that he did before he enlisted in the Civil War? This is another from the same period called Prisoners at the Front. So Homer really began to become famous by his depictions of life at the time of the Civil War. A wonderful depiction of childhood is a painting that he did in 1866 called Snap the Whip. And I've often used this as an indication of the carefree days of childhood. I love this one. This is Eagles Point, Manchester, Massachusetts. It shows the rather ridiculous by our standards today bathing costumes that women were supposed to wear. We can see the girl with the long blonde hair wringing out her garment. You can see the water drops. And the little dog there, I think that's priceless. He doesn't want to get water spilled on him. And this painting, in many ways, is a presage to the wonderful seascapes that Winslow Homer is best now renowned for. He ended his life living in a solitary cottage at Prout's Neck, Maine, and was very much inspired by the awesome power of the sea. Breezing up. My parents had a print of this in my bedroom growing up. It's one of the best known images of Gloucester fishermen. And one of the things that makes this rather unusual in terms of its composition is that the boat is not centered. And I think because of the way that Homer moves the composition to the left and cuts part of the sail, it really gives the sense of motion. This is called the lifeline, which is a rescue at sea. And here you have the body of the woman limp in her rescuer's arms, and her life depends, rescuing her from a shipwreck on the lifeline and the pulley that is seen at the top of the painting. This is another one of men rescuing a drowning person at sea. In this painting, worthy of some great explanation, this is called the Gulf Stream. And this is it kind of takes us into another layer of Winslow Homer's seascape paintings, because with this we enter a more extreme form of realism called naturalism, like we would see in the harshness of Jack London's stories. And here is an African-American man who is doomed to die because the mast of his ship is broken. The rudder is gone. At the forefront of the picture, you can see the sharks rather menacingly. And in the one instance where I saw this painting live at an exhibition, what you don't see here in the print is the blood that the sharks have already consumed some humans. And as part of the futility of this man never being rescued, very faintly in the top left-hand corner of the ship of the painting, you can see the ship that obviously does not see the man, and you have the water spout at right that is going to further compound this. And when we look at what this represents in terms of what Homer stood for in his life, this is really his indictment of how society after the Civil War were treating African Americans. So there's a lot more to this particular painting than meets the eye. And this is a lovely one called Turtle Pond. And late in his life, when Winslow Homer could paint what he wanted just for his own pleasure, he would make occasional trips to the Florida Keys and the Bahamas, and he was very much entranced by Bahamian fishermen and painted many watercolors of fishermen at their work bringing in the catch. Something very different, Mary Cassatt. Mary Cassatt was born in Pennsylvania to a wealthy American family who could take her for months on end to Europe. And for most of her life, from her 20s onwards, she lived in France. Here is an early portrait of Mary Cassatt, looking just a little bit uneased, that she is kind of slouching. She doesn't look like she's terribly happy with the conventions of society. There are a few photographs of Mary Cassatt. In this one of her that was taken as an elderly lady around 1913, you can see that she's wearing glasses. And what a heartache for an artist that Mary Cassatt, by the time she died at the age of 82, was blind from cataract. She had 3 unsuccessful operations for removing the cataracts from her eyes. She is best known for her theme of mothers and children and painting children. And it was the artist Edgar Degas who suggested to her, among other impressionistic artists of the time, let this be your trademark, that you would be painting mothers and children. A little bit of irony, because Mary Cassatt never married and never had children of her own. This painting is called A Cup of Tea, and the woman who is the host at left is Mary Cassatt's sister, Lydia. And like the self-portrait that we saw of Mary Cassatt, she looks a little bit bored, and you can see the etiquette that when the woman called to tea, she is drinking from the china cup, with the pinky extended. And this is a little bit of a commentary on social etiquette and how people are kind of living in prescribed rules, but rules that don't make either one of them very comfortable. And if you notice, between Lydia at left and the lady drinking tea, they don't have a whole lot to talk about. Love this painting. This is at the Shelburne Museum, and this is the young Electra Havemeyer Webb with her mother, Lusine Havemeyer. Lusine, who married a sugar magnate, H.H. Havemeyer, spent many years in Paris and was a friend of Mary Cassatt and championed her work being exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So this is a charming study of a person who has a strong connection with Vermont, because we know that Electra Havemeyer Webb would go on to found the Shelburne Museum. Another lovely painting. This was on a 1964 postage stamp. It's called The Boating Party, and it's interesting that we only see a little bit of the man here. He is turned away from us so that the focus of the picture is the mother and the child. And in this painting, we see a new phase that Mary Cassatt entered into in the late 1880s, when she, like Whistler, was very much inspired by Japanese art. So you look at the kind of the Japanese style furniture in the background, and what makes this painting unusual is the angles at which. So we look as if we're looking down on the mother and the child at the time of the bath. And I love this one as well. This is called Pat a Cake, and it's really a wonderful, endearing depiction of the love between a mother and a child as the mother is teaching her daughter to play pat a cake. And just a little stylistic notation that dates this painting to around 1890. These are called leg of mutton sleeves, which were the fashion rage at the time that this was painted. Thomas Eakins, very different, born the same year as Mary Cassatt, also a Pennsylvanian, and Thomas Eakins would be known as a realist. So photograph of him at right in one of his dark, moody self-portraits. And in his paintings that very much exemplify realism, Thomas Eakins, we would probably have him diagnosed with some form of depression. His best-known work, painted in the early 1870s, was called The Gross Clinic. Now, gross here is not a qualifying adjective as to what is happening, but rather it is the surgeon, who is Dr. Gross, operating in an operating theater on a young man who had a tumor on his knee. And at the left of the painting, you can see the mother who is present at this, and all the medical students in the background looking on. And I do believe that the patient was anesthetized. So this is a real slice of realism. But in 1876, when Eakins tried to have this painting accepted into the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1870, it was turned down. So this is part of the irony, that something that we recognize as a pioneering work of art today is not something that was accepted by the public back in 1876. Eakins was very much enamored of athletes, and here we have the champion rower along the Schuylkill River near Pittsburgh, and this is called Max Schmidt, in a single skull. And one of the things that Eakins did in his studio, he actually had a skull erected on sawhorses, and he did motion studies. So here we can see that the principal figure, Max Schmidt, looks exhausted from the rigorous act of rowing that he has just done. And we would have to enlarge the image to see that the man behind Max Schmidt is Eakins himself, who put himself in the picture, and on the back of the skull is his name, Eakins. Similarly, we have two more rowers here, in this one called Turning the Stake. And of course, in my years of being a student in Boston during my college years, you could see the Harvard crewing team doing something similar on the Charles River. Another one of, I think, somewhat melancholy paintings of Thomas Eakins. This is called The Singer. And it's showing this woman who is obviously a competent professional, but he's not glamorizing her in any way. We know that she must be successful because you can see some flowers that have been thrown on the stage. And here we have two more melancholy portraits by Eakins. The one is a friend of his, and he called this The Thinker. And the woman at right is Eakins' wife, Susanna, who looks very sad because Eakins managed to get himself into some pretty serious trouble. In his art studio, he had semi-clad models, and with propriety, particularly with male models, they were supposed to be somewhat covered. And when Eakins removed the loincloth from some of his models, this ensued a scandal, and it really damaged his reputation for a while. John Singer Sargent. John Singer Sargent, born in Florence, Italy, to wealthy parents, spent much of his life in Europe. Here you can see his self-portrait juxtaposed with the man himself. He was very much a gourmand. He loved to eat, and this was a factor in his short life. He was only 69 when he died of a massive heart attack. And trained in portraiture, the scandal that launched John Singer Sargent's career was his portrait of a Parisian socialite who was known as Madame X. And as he first painted the image, which we see here in the photograph at left, he painted Virginie Gaudreau with her strap down, as you can see on her left, on our left. Her husband did not like it, made her look a little too easy, so the painting went back into Sargent's studio and he moved the strap up. And this is one of his paintings that really has toured the world. Its permanent home, which I've seen many times, is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. Another, at least New England connection here, is one of Sargent's patrons was Isabella Stewart Gardner, who built a mansion of a Venetian palazzo at the Fenway in Boston, right behind the Museum of Fine Arts. And in this image here of very flattering image of Mrs. Gardner, painted in 1888, lots of sleeves, certainly a low neckline for a woman, somewhat scandalous painting at the time. And then at the very end of Isabella Stewart Gardner's life, he painted her again as the lady in white. One of my favorite paintings is The Daughters of Edward G. Boyd. And here, Edward G. Boyd was a New England industrialist, father of 4 daughters that are all dressed in their similar pinafores here. And the thing that is really indicative of the wealth of this family, you look at the Chinese vase that is taller than one of the older girls. And the one who I think is most animated, who is playing with her little doll on the floor, is the youngest daughter, who is looking right at us. And ironically, it was from the youngest daughter's estate that this painting passed into the hands of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And when the American wing was completed about 20 years ago, the new American wing, this painting was given pride of place. So when you enter the American wing from the courtyard, you can see here in this image the painting as well as the 2 vases that are actually in the painting. This painting raised a few eyebrows at the time. This is Dr. Pozzi, who was an Italian obstetrician living in Paris. And Sargent painted him in his mourning attire. And normally one did not paint someone, especially a professional like Dr. Pozzi, that we can see here with his beautiful red robe. I've always wanted a bathrobe like that. And very typical of the great society portraits that Sargent painted that really won him renown when he got past the Madame X scandal. Here you have the Wyndham sisters, and not visible terribly well in this reproduction, their mother, who was a society beauty in her day, her portrait is dimly seen in the background. Fascinating story behind this painting of Mr. and Mrs. I. Ann Phelps Stokes. If you notice that she is dressed for bicycling, and she's holding her hat in a very funny way, because originally when the portrait was commissioned, she was estranged from her husband. So she had her Great Dane dog painted in the painting. And then when the husband got back in the picture, as you can see here in the background, Sargent didn't want to create an entirely new composition, so that's why her hand is holding the hat in a very, very peculiar way. And at the end of his life, the last years of his life, Sargent decided that he could paint what he wanted and what would inspire him. And during World War I, having seen the horrors of gas and trench warfare, he painted this painting so unlike the society portraits that he painted. And this one, a very large, a very panoramic painting, simply is called Gas. And I see that I have over-planned for this today. I have 2 artists that have yet to go. So what I will do is that I will return to our theme next month of these enduring American artists, and I will get to Frederick Remington and the world that he painted as well. So stay tuned for more about these wonderful artists, and we will start our program for next month on Frederick Remington. Thank you for watching.